Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Some of you may or may not know that this Wednesday, September 17th, is Constitution Day. It signifies the date that the Constitutional Convention completed its work on a new Constitution to replace the first Constitution known as the Articles of Confederation. The convention started in May of that year in Philadelphia for the express purpose of amending the Articles of Confederation to meet the needs of the United States on issues of commerce, war, enforcing treaties, and payment of a debt accrued during the Revolution, as well as taxes. But some had grander schemes in mind and wanted a much stronger federal government than currently existed. Ignoring the limited mandate they had to amend the Articles of Confederation and the process for that they created a document that allowed the federal government much more power, the ability to enforce it on individuals rather than beg states for compliance. Some well-known patriots objected to many of the provisions on the grounds that it would give the federal government far too much power and that they were only authorized to amend the Articles of Confederation, not create a whole new constitution. Ultimately, the states did ratify the new document, but with great concern that led to the passage of the Bill of Rights in 1791. Those that opposed the new Constitution were labeled as Anti-Federalists, a misnomer to be sure, but their objections were strong enough to raise doubts among the people that passage was uncertain in key states like New York and Virginia. As it turns out, many of the predictions of the Anti-Federalists turned out to be very accurate. Our guest tonight is William J. Watkins Jr. of the Independent Institute and author of the 2016 book, Crossroads for Liberty, Recovering the Anti-Federalist Values of America's First Constitution. He also has there is another book, The Independent Guide to the Constitution. This is a book will be out after the first of the year. Original Intentions, Modern Inventions. Bill will be here to discuss the very valid points brought up by the Anti-Federalists and how we have seen them play out over history. But first, it's time for the Informer Report. Over the last few weeks, we have witnessed a lot of pure evil in America. We've seen the slaughter of an innocent white woman from Ukraine, Irina Zaratuska, on a train in Charlotte, North Carolina, for absolutely no reason. She was attacked by a black man, DeCarlos Brown Jr. What makes it even worse is that other blacks sat by and not only allowed it to happen, but did nothing to help the woman as she laid on the floor bleeding and dying. I assume there were probably some whites on that train as well. He then slowly and casually walked off the train carrying the knife, still dripping blood. We all know how that scenario would have played out had the situation been reversed. Charlotte would be in ashes, and there would have been attacks on random whites. According to the news report, the man had been arrested 14 times, some for violent crimes, and his own mother was scared of him. But Charlotte, like most Democrat-run cities, is soft on crime, and the mayor seems more concerned with minimizing the negative press than making the city safer and protecting the public from savages. Charlie Kirk. We want to first express our sympathy to Charlie Kirk's wife and family for the loss, and his parents, as well as any brothers and sisters. As you all know, Charlie Kirk was murdered by a leftist this week. I suspect it was really the Red-Green Alliance behind it. 22-year-old Tyler Robertson was turned in by his father. He was reported to have admitted to his dad that he killed Charlie. A rifle was recovered, but so far there is not any ballistics to match. Robertson reportedly is living with a man who is transitioning to be a woman. Charlie was an outstanding young man who was unabashedly Christian and conservative. He was having a huge impact on the younger generation with his open debates promoting Christianity and conservatism. He spoke out against Marxism, Islam, and the trans insanity that many young people have been sucked into by the left. He was wise beyond his years, and he was key to winning so many young voters for Trump. So the left did what they always do in those situations. They used violence and they killed Charlie. I think that will ultimately backfire on them because they will create more Charlie Kirks. And more Charlie Kirks is a good thing for America. God bless the Kirk family. Now, also on that issue, it's just been sickening to watch all the people celebrating this. You've got people from all walks of life that think this is a good thing. They are telling us who they are. And they are making it clear that not only did they want to kill Charlie, but they would like to kill people just like Charlie, anywhere and everywhere. We're in a dangerous time, and we better do something because it will only get worse if we don't do something about this. But we have a sick society, and I blame this on the schools. I blame this on families. Raising a kid who thinks it's a good thing to murder somebody for saying something you disagree with. That's just sick. You know, most of the times in the past, when you have political violence, the person that's targeted is an elected official, maybe a bureaucrat, but just another citizen speaking his mind. That is the kind of stuff that you really only hear from, that you see the Islamists doing in other countries. But I did mention the Red-Green Alliance, and I think that they are tied to this. September 11th, we recently remembered the 24th anniversary of those lost on 9/11 and those that died in Afghanistan and Iraq later. But have we forgotten the cause, or did we ever learn that lesson? 24 years later, and there's even more Muslims in our country, more in power, more cities controlled by Muslims, Muslims building cities, and Muslims in important positions in our government. There still seems to be no institutional recognition by our government at any level or in law enforcement that the doctrine of Islam is incompatible with the Constitution. I would add to that, Marxism is incompatible with our Constitution, and a good chunk of the Democrats in this country are Marxist. Worse yet, we still don't seem to realize or acknowledge the Red-Green Alliance, that is, the Marxists and Muslims working together to take down our country. We better wake up. The National Guard is coming to Memphis. President Trump and Governor Lee confirmed that the National Guard is coming to Memphis. President Trump said active duty could be sent as well. This is supposedly all to fight crime. A lot of people are cheering this, but it's definitely not what the founders intended, and it's a bad precedent, in my opinion. D.C. is one thing, but any other city is a problem. Now, clarify a couple of things. If the president can deploy troops called the Guard to enforce federal law, and if he may, I'm sure that some of this will involve ICE. That's one thing, okay? But just basic crime fighting is still a state responsibility. And I have to ask, why could Lee not have called out the Guard? I mean, Memphis has been a problem for a long time. You would have thought that we, at our state level, could have called out the Guard and dealt with this. Really, not even before the Lee administration, past governors, past legislators, as far as I can tell, it's a failure on their part. It shouldn't take the federal government to come in and do this, whether it's being done the right way or not. But I think it's disgraceful that our state did not take care of this a long time ago. And Bill Lee's been in office, 7 years? Memphis has been a problem the whole time. What has he done? It seems like all that our supermajority wants to do is throw money at problems. If they pass laws, usually those laws don't have any teeth. And so that's a real problem. That wraps up this installment of the Informer Report. If you have a news story that you want to alert us to, be sure to send us an email at tninformer.tv@gmail.com. Now a little bit about our guest, William J. Watkins Jr. He is a research fellow at the Independent Institute and author of the book Crossroads for Liberty, Recovering the Anti-Federalist Values of America's First Constitution. He received his BA in History and German, summa cum laude from Clemson University, and his JD cum laude from the University of South Carolina School of Law, and his LLM with merit from the University of London. Mr. Watkins is a former law clerk to Judge William B. Traxler, Jr. of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. He is president of the Greenville, South Carolina Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society. He has served as a prosecutor, defense lawyer, and has practiced in various states and federal courts. Hey, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming on.
Good to be with you again, Dave.
Yeah. How's everything going there in South Carolina?
Well, it's still hot this time of year, but we're getting ready for a gubernatorial primary for the Republican Party, and we'll see who can pull that out with the most money.
The highest bidder. That sounds familiar. Do you have, are either one of those bidders decent candidates, out of curiosity?
We've got an interesting pool. A lot of folks in the race. Our current governor, Henry McMaster, a big Trump supporter. He will be retiring from office, so this is a chance for everyone to scurry and see what they can do.
Okay. So since Constitution Day is Wednesday, and there's a lot of ignorance about our history in general and the Constitution specifically, I thought it'd be a good idea to have someone of your caliber on the show, and I really, once again, appreciate you taking the time to come on with us. And I really want to just really get to the questions. Let's talk a little bit about the convention in 1787. Those that supported the new Constitution claimed that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient and couldn't be amended to meet the needs of the United States, and that a whole new Constitution was needed. Do you think that was accurate at the time?
I think that's sort of a simplistic understanding of the situation. Let's remember first that rather than a worthless form of government, as historians and a lot of professors will describe the Articles, is they were very successful in achieving two stated goals, their primary goals. One was to preserve the self-government of the various states, the 13 legislatures, and two was to defeat a superpower that was Great Britain in the War of Independence. And obviously, it succeeded in both. We had to have some foreign assistance, of course, on the latter, with France assisting our forces, but we were successful in that regard. Now, did the Confederation have certain problems? Sure. And probably any government in the wake of a war, multiple years on your home soil, where property was lost, lives were lost, etc. You have an economic downturn following the end of the war. Any government is going to struggle. And sure, the Confederation government certainly struggled, especially in servicing its debts.
Right. Now, I know one of the things that I remember reading about it was, and I'm sure that people like Washington and Hamilton, they both actually fought in the Revolution. And I know that from everything I've read, Washington pretty much had to beg, I guess, the different state governors to chip in the part that they had, were supposed to chip in during the war. And of course, we relied a lot on militia, and militia not always effective. We did have overall a small, Continental Army that eventually was well trained and made a big difference. So I've always kind of figured that I kind of understood their position on that aspect of it as far as the military, but I'd always kind of wondered, did we really need all these other things that this new federal government created?
Right. The Confederation could have been saved if the 13 states could have gotten together and given Congress an independent source of revenue, an impost. 12 states twice agreed to that. The first time Rhode Island threw a monkey wrench in, and then New York the second time. Congress needed that independent source of revenue. Most Americans agreed with it. Again, a supermajority of the states. Unfortunately, the articles required unanimity to amend them, and that requirement proved really to be their downfall. Now, you certainly have new powers granted the federal government, but if you look at the enumerated powers in the articles, many of the current federal government's powers were just cut and pasted from the Confederation. It's just they were energized, perhaps more than they should have been, but energized nonetheless.
Right. So would you say that the biggest flaw of the articles was the fact that all 13 states had to agree to make a change to the Constitution?
Absolutely. We would still probably have some sort of confederal system absent that. And again, I get it. Juries decide cases unanimously, jury of 12. But when it comes to government, it comes to matters of self-interest, and we assume a jury is not self-interested, that they don't have that bias. It's a little different, and you can have states, greedy for their own money coming in their own coffers or other matters. One state can stop the whole system, and that's exactly what happened, and certainly led to calls for a significant revision and ultimately a new form of government.
So other than that, what other amendments do you think could have made the articles workable?
Well, I will tell you one thing I would have liked to have seen would be a bicameral body and a formal executive branch. At this time, Americans were under influence because of the British rule. They had problems with the royal governors, so they distrusted executive power. So you don't see a separate executive branch under the Articles of Confederation. You have a unicameral Congress. I think bicameralism, as we have in our current Constitution, is a greater security for the people, where a measure has to pass two houses before it can become law. I do think that helps with deliberation to get good laws, and perhaps even keep folks from raising some bad laws. I think another strength of the Confederation was its rotation in office, what we call term limits. I wish we could adopt that system federally now. The framers realized of the Confederation that you don't want a permanent governing class at the seat of government. You want fresh blood. You want to put men back on the streets, working, if you will, feeling the pinch of laws that they enact. So I would have liked to have seen definitely a bicameral body and a separate executive branch, essentially separation of powers as we have. And those are a couple things that come to mind, just to answer that quickly.
Now, term limits, a lot of people support term limits. I think, and this is just my thought, with the way the federal government of today, I'm not sure that term limits would work as well, because we have a lot more bureaucrats than we had in the federal government, and the branches the departments, the branches as well, have so much more power. I'm not sure that if we had just term limits without getting our government back under control, I'm not sure they would work as well as they would have under the Articles of Confederation. What do you think? Do you think that they would still be worthwhile?
No, that's a very fair point. I do think term limits would be worthwhile nonetheless, but your point is well taken that we essentially have this administrative state, deep state, as some will call it, and many of the major decisions that affect lives, that affect our industries and other things like that, are made by folks whose name will never appear on a ballot, who most people have never heard of. And there's little to no accountability there, at least in theory. We can go to the polls and throw a bum out of office that's our representative or a senator or even the president of the United States. But with these shadow officials, if you will, these administrators, there's nothing we can do. And there's not this fourth branch of government outlined in the Constitution. That is the experts, the administrators. But that's what we have today, and that's who calls the shots very often. So, yeah, I still think term limits would be worthwhile to have that turnover in Congress and that energy. But your point is well made that. The Confederation Congress and even up to prior to the New Deal, we didn't have this permanent bureaucracy that we have now, which is a real problem.
Absolutely. Now, a lot of people have heard of, they may have read the Federalist Papers or at least heard of them. Not as many people are familiar with the Anti-Federalist or the Anti-Federalist Papers for that matter, but that whole term, Anti-Federalist, that's not actually an accurate description. And I think actually the Federalists labeled the Anti-Federalists that. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, you never want to be the group that has the anti-attack to your to your cause, but that's what happened to the Anti-Federalists. And a number of them complained about it. They pointed out that a better distinction would be Republican, little r, that they were the Republicans, and the Federalists were the Republicans, or better yet, you might say the Federalists were the Continentalists or the Nationalists, and the Anti-Federalists, your states' rights men, your localists that believe that government closer to the people could govern better, would be safer, and that such tasks as can be done locally and close to the people ought to be done that way.
Now, other than the structure, now if I remember right, under the Articles of Confederation, I don't think we had a Supreme Court either, did we?
No, there was no judicial branch. Congress could adjudicate, say, land disputes between states. They could also appoint admiralty courts. For example, if a prize was taken on the high seas by a American privateer or the American or an ally, something like that, so that could be adjudicated. But nope, there was no formal judicial branch as we would recognize it.
Okay. I like that. Especially at the federal level.
In a lot of ways, we can long for those days, considering how much power our unelected judges exercise over us today.
Absolutely. Now, so other than the structure, what were some of the biggest concerns of the Anti-Federalists, or we could call them the True Federalists? What were some of their biggest concerns?
Well, one, you have just the whole fundamental issue of scale. Montesquieu, the great French political philosopher, taught that Republican government cannot exist on a large scale, that it can only be healthy in small units close to the people. So the Anti-Federalists questioned, how can we have so-called Republican government that spans a continent up and down the coast? These representatives will have nothing in common with most of the people, won't know the situation in various states. This is a recipe for disaster. So you have this whole issue of scale. You had many Anti-Federalists thought that some of the states already were too big to be commonwealths, republics. They would have liked to have seen smaller sizes there. So here you have this huge continental government about to be formed. So you have this fundamental issue of scale. Then you have the issue, for example, of consolidation, which we would call centralization. Today, they use the term consolidation. And by that, they meant that they were afraid that the federal government, the general government, would just be some vortex that all power was sucked into, and the states would be rendered administrative subdivisions of this great national body. This was antithetical to Republican principles, where, again, Anti-Federalists believe that the representatives of the people ought to have something in common with them. They ought to mix with them. In smaller levels of government, the people can often go to church or go to the market and see their representatives and their neighbors. There's some connection there. Whereas as you get larger and larger districts, and I believe today your typical congressional district represents about 750, 760,000 people. Frankly, even the Federalists of the time would scoff at what we have today as representation, but certainly the Anti-Federalists would shake their heads on that. So you have this idea of consolidation, you have scale, you have, the whole idea of powers, who is going to exercise what powers and at what level. We have an invigoration of powers in the U.S. Constitution. There was a great concern about the Commerce Clause, for example, that would be used really to hurt the interests of the southern states. It depended on free trade more so than the northern states, as well as clauses such as a necessary and proper clause, a general welfare clause that could be abused. So this idea of the language, the construction of the Constitution as well.
Now, but like you said, some of those were in the Articles of Confederation as well, but because we were now adding an executive, we were now adding a Supreme Court, and I'm sure that the Supremacy Clause caused a lot of concern. And that even though you had the Article 1, Section 8, then if you look at that, but then you read the Supremacy Clause, that is kind of contradictory. I mean, you can see how they would be concerned of, well, okay, you're saying these are the powers, but then you're saying that federal law is supreme. So was that also one of their concerns?
That was one of their concerns, and the Federalists tried to answer that issue. Essentially, Hamilton said, sure, of course, federal law is supreme, but if it's an unconstitutional act, if it's contrary to the enumerated powers, then that's no law. It is void and of no force. So don't worry about that. Of course, Hamilton sounds a good bit like a nullifier in the Federalist Papers as he argued for those points. Of course, he changed his tune a bit later, but that was the argument that was presented. Don't worry about that. Certainly an unconstitutional law is not enforceable. Everybody knows that.
Yeah. You mentioned scale a minute ago, and they thought it was too big then, and they had maybe 4 or 5 million people, somewhere in that range.
Right.
I mean, we're just 300 million, 330. Not all citizens, but a lot more people, a lot bigger area. So I mean, yeah, 700,000, or if that's the average district now, somewhere along those lines, that is crazy. There's no way that any rep could really know his district that well. And majority of the people in his district probably never get to sit down and talk with him or, get anything other than a, cut and paste email.
That's exactly right. It's and even again, Washington himself, though I would put him in the Federalist camp, especially when we get into parties. I mean, he certainly was a Federalist, i.e., he favored ratification of the Constitution, and then his parties started to form. He would have been in the Hamiltonian or Federalist camp, but even Washington was concerned about the whole representation issue. Again, I think if these men that wanted a constitution, they still understood this idea of representation, and though they wanted a stronger government than the Anti-Federalists, it'd still be horrified at what we have today with representation and other issues, as you pointed out.
Yeah. So I don't think we would have gotten the Bill of Rights without the Anti-Federalists and without the fact that a lot of states, key states, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts at the time, they were really concerned about this. They were like, wait a minute, are we just recreating what we fought against? And, I don't think without the Anti-Federalists we would have our Bill of Rights. Do you?
No, we absolutely wouldn't. The Federalists made a big blunder that almost cost them in the Philadelphia Convention. George Mason of Virginia, of course, the author of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, pointed out at the very end that we don't have a Bill of Rights here. Every people should have that. You give me a couple hours, I'll have a good Bill of Rights drafted up for us. Well, they poo-pooed that suggestion. Some of the main arguments against the Bill of Rights, which logically make sense, is that, well, this is not like your typical state government where they have a police power, i.e., they can legislate for the health, welfare, morals of the people in a general matter. What we have is only few and defined powers where the national government will act on foreign affairs, foreign commerce, war. So why would we need a Bill of Rights on matters where they could infringe our rights? They don't have any power. A logical argument, if you believe they're going to stick to those powers and not abuse the document via construction. But that was the Federalist argument. The Anti-Federalists weren't buying it. Jefferson didn't buy it in his correspondence to Madison. He said every people deserves a Bill of Rights against any government. That should be a precondition of any constitution. And Madison eventually begrudgingly agreed, and the Federalists, to quiet the Anti-Federalists, promised subsequent amendments. Now, we shouldn't it wasn't necessarily just a Bill of Rights declaring certain liberties, but they promised that they would consider certain structural matters as well. Well, they didn't really intend to keep that promise. So, what we have is sort of a poor man's version of amendments in our first 10 amendments compared to what the Anti-Federalists were asking them to do.
Yeah, and I think most every state that recommended amendments recommended some version of what we have today with the 10th, and I would imagine the second as well, from everything.
You see, obviously, the Articles had Article 2, which was their version of the 10th Amendment, but had that great word expressly in there. The states retained their sovereignty, their power, except in matters expressly delegated to the center. So that was sort of the model for the 10th Amendment, is Article 2, not as robust as Article 2 of the Confederation, but still conveyed an important point, as well as the Ninth Amendment. The Ninth Amendment, frankly, I view it as more of a rule of construction. There was a concern that the powers given to the general government would have a wide latitude in interpretation. And though we today often hear arguments that the Ninth Amendment is to protect unenumerated rights, it was more a rule of construction, in my opinion. But yeah, it's still a poor man's Bill of Rights, but most states did demand 10th type amendment. You see calls for something akin to our Second Amendment, as well as search and seizure, cruel and unusual punishments, etc.
I think a lot of people believe that erroneously believe that a lot of these rights that we have that were mentioned in the Declaration or that we have in the Constitution, they think that that was a creation of the founders, but those were rights that they had, had under the British Constitution to at least some degree. They understood that as their rights. They didn't just create these. Is that more accurate than what a lot of people believe?
You are very accurate there, Dave. If you look at the English Declaration of Rights, English Bill of Rights, I do that in my classes when I teach, as we go through that. And the students are just astounded at the similarities with the American Bill of Rights, where you do have rights mentioning firearms. You have cruel and unusual punishment, searches, a number of things that we take for granted in our Bill of Rights. You see, there's an English antecedent for this. As you said, this wasn't made up out of thin air. This was a cherished right of Englishmen.
Yep. Now, the predictions, a lot of the predictions, or a lot of the fear, the reason we ended up with a lot of the Bill of Rights were because of fears of the way and wording of the Constitution. And you mentioned some of it, like the necessary and proper clause, the general welfare clause, supremacy clause, the clause about the Supreme Court. The Anti-Federalists were concerned even after they got, I mean, this was before they got the Bill of Rights, but even after we got the Bill of Rights, almost all the predictions the Anti-Federalists made about abuses of these particular clauses have come true. I mean, even with the Bill of Rights. Is there anything?
We're in a position where we can play Monday morning quarterback, and we can watch the game film and we can see what happened. And you're right. You look at these Anti-Federalist arguments, they seem pretty intelligent looking back on the past, where they predicted certain provisions would be abused, would be destructive of the state governments and the people's liberties. It's remarkable to see, these predictions and how they have come to pass. Now, granted, the Federalist Party and later political parties had to pretty much abandon the promises they made during the ratification controversy to reach those results, but abandon they did.
Yeah, and some of that was like almost instantaneous. I mean, Hamilton, just no compunction at all with completely ignoring everything he'd said, or most of what he'd said in the Federalist Papers, and or any comments he made in the convention. He seemed to have no problem, especially where commerce and taxation were concerned.
Oh yeah, you think about, clearly in the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, for example, an excise tax. He says, Congress needs this power, but it'll never use it except in cases of a great national danger. And then what do we have? Secretary of the Treasury Hamilton and Congress putting the excise on whiskey, which leads to the Whiskey Rebellion in Washington's administration. Again, a promise not kept there. And you could go on with the bank and other aspects of the Hamiltonian financial plan. He was happy to hear those representations about limits, make some of the same arguments himself during the ratification controversy. But once he got what he wanted, it was pedal to the metal for national power.
Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
And there have been a long line of Hamiltonians that have followed in his footsteps. From, you think of the more famous ones, the Henry Clays, the Abraham Lincolns, the Woodrow Wilsons, the FDRs, etc.
Yeah. Now, as divided as our country is, and I don't see that division getting any better anytime soon, what principle from the Anti-Federalists would be the most helpful?
Now, that's a great question. I think probably their belief in federalism, that revolutionary principle. American federalism did not start with the Constitution. If you think about it, it was really an argument over federalism that led to the Revolution. The Americans posited a federal system much akin to today's British Commonwealth system that the British would not accept at that time. It was self-government. We wanted to govern ourselves in our own assemblies, and we went to war with the greatest empire on earth to claim that right of self-government in preferably a federal system. We had a federal system immediately established then on this continent with the Articles of Confederation on the heels of the Revolution. That was a natural step to the framers. The Anti-Federalists arguing for a stronger federal system than they thought the Constitution was giving them. And to answer your question, what could we learn or what principle, how are we going to live together in this country as large as it is, with so many differing opinions, with this winner take all philosophy on every issue? Every issue. How are we going to live together and not kill each other or hate each other? The only answer I see is federalism, to believe that, hey, there might be 50 different answers to a particular question,
Yep.
or what the people of California are doing to wreck their state is their business. If that's how they choose to govern themselves, let them have it. But reciprocally, how we choose to govern ourselves in Tennessee or South Carolina or wherever should be none of Gavin Newsom's concern. We can have, say, a fetal heartbeat law on the abortion issue here in South Carolina without doing any injustice to California with a more permissive abortion regulation scheme. If we insist on this sort of winner take all thing, we are going to kill each other. We are not going to be able to live together in peace. And federalism is the key to doing that.
It will be 10 or it will be 2. It's going to be the 10th Amendment or it's going to be the second.
That's right.
And usually I follow that up with an adjective, but we won't do that today. As divide, so I think that's the best method. Strict federalism, 10th Amendment, and of course, that undoes pretty much everything over the last 100 years, at least. I mean, really, you go back to the 1860s. I mean, that's when it didn't necessarily have to turn out as bad as it has, but you kind of lost it in 1865 when we were forced into a union. And I'm not going down that road tonight. I cover that in other shows. But once we get an income tax, because that's what gives the federal government power, and then once the Wilson administration, and then really FDR, I mean, you have to go back almost 100 years to undo all this. But I see that as the only way that we're going to be able to stay together as a country. Just we have to be ruthless about federalism, 10th Amendment, and getting the federal government out of things that they don't. We've got to limit them to Article 1, Section 8. If it's not there, they don't do it, and we don't allow them to do it. That's the other part of that. They're not just going to keep their word. We got over 200, almost going on 250 years of proving that they're not going to keep their word, or 40 some with the Constitution. Any other thoughts on that before we get to the courts, my favorite topic?
No, I'll just say that, Madison certainly realized that in the Federalist Papers, Federalist 51. Madison touts the vertical and horizontal checks and balances of the Constitution. Obviously by horizontal, he meant the separation of powers within the federal government with a judiciary, a executive, and a Congress. But then, you have this vertical as well, where Madison is clear that he anticipated the states and the national government serving as checks on each other. That was key to this scheme of federalism, this scheme of ordered liberty. We have a situation today where there is no check in that regard. The states essentially do as they're told. And I think that is a weakness of our current system.
You wrote a chapter in a book titled In All Fairness, and your chapter was The Retreat from Equality Before the Law. You talk about the 14th Amendment, the due process, as well as the Equal Protection Clause. Historically, didn't due process just apply to the established judicial process rather than the Supreme Court deciding if they like the process?
That's correct. Due process forever in Anglo-American jurisprudence just meant the steps that a government had to follow before it could deprive a citizen of life, liberty, or property via the judicial system, via prosecution or what have you there. Everybody understood what due process was. Unfortunately, after the ratification of the 14th Amendment, and there are many problems with the amendment we can discuss, but you have this idea arise that there is a substantive component to due process. And it's exactly what you said. It essentially allows the court to look at a law passed by a state and decide, is it arbitrary? Is it capricious? Or to put it more simply, is it something we like? If it's something we like, then there's been due process. If it's a law we don't like, then due process has been denied and the law is struck. Now, that's a very simple way of describing it, but that's the truth of what the matter is.
Now, when the 14th was first passed in 1868, due process meant what you just described. It's the process of the court. And equal protection at the time just meant, okay, you have to offer the same protection to blacks, the newly freed slaves, as you do a white man. So you can't have one law that punishes a white man one way and a black man the other way. It's got to be the same. Was that pretty much what the Equal Protection Clause was about?
No, that's a very fair summary there, that the freedmen as well as white citizens were equal under the law. You couldn't have a scheme of second-class citizenship for the freedmen where they didn't have access to the courts, where you had vagrancy laws, these black codes, as they were called, that would say punish a free black man if he didn't have a pass to be out traveling, or if he did not have a job at the time where he could be put in jail or some sort of peonage, that type thing. So, good reason to have an equal protection clause to ensure all citizens have equal protection of the law. But this quickly morphed into something else throughout the course of history.
So, from what I've looked at, and I know you've looked at a lot more than what I have. So, the first major case after the 14th Amendment was the Slaughterhouse case. And was there anything with due process or equal protection or substantive due process or any perversion of the Equal Protection Clause until the late 1800s, early 1900s? I know that the first time that the court decided that the First Amendment had been incorporated through the 14th was like in 1925, Get Low case or something like that. But for almost 60 years, did it not have pretty much the same understanding as in the Slaughterhouse case?
I think that's correct. Now, you can find a couple of oddball antecedents, like, for example, a New York state court case in the late 1850s, essentially prohibition type case where bar owners, hotels, etc., were going to lose the money that they had put into buying alcohol, wine, spirits, because it all of a sudden become illegal. And, court said, well, that denies them due process of law. You could also argue that the Taney Court and Dred Scott had a substantive view of due process dealing with slavery in the territories. But again, these are outliers. These aren't majority reports, if you will, on the issue. But you don't see what we know now as substantive due process until after the 14th Amendment, as you pointed out. And really, it's the lawyers for corporations and big business that are looking to find new mechanisms to benefit their clients, to relieve their clients from state police power regulations that put restrictions on business, to come up with a novel constitutional argument from these new amendments, the 14th in particular, for the advantage of their clients. And that's where you sort of find the genesis, I think, of substantive due process.
Right. And then later on, you get the whole incorporation thing. Like I say, I think the first one for First Amendment was in the 20s, but then you get to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and it's just like, wait a minute, for the first 60 years, and tell me if I'm wrong, but for the first 60 years, incorporation of the Bill of Rights through the 14th was not a thing, right? For the most part?
It was it was rejected. Now there's some dissenting opinions along the way in cases in the late 1800s where you do have some justices, but again in a minority arguing for incorporation of certain provisions of the Bill of Rights. But again, the majority report, most people did not understand the Bill of Rights to be applied to the states. They didn't think that the 14th Amendment did any violence to the idea that, hey, the Bill of Rights applies to the federal government, states have their own bills of rights, and the only additional restrictions are what we've talked about, equal protection of the laws,
Right.
and procedural due process guaranteed to all citizens there. So yeah, that's sort of the understanding until you have the Supreme Court in the 20s, and then moves forward with a lot of steam, and you have Hugo Black's famous opinion in Adamson, where he argues for total incorporation and cites some debates in Congress with the 14th Amendment in support of that. I think his legal research has been proved to be fairly faulty, and the better weight of the evidence is nobody really believed in incorporation at that time or later.
Yeah. So incorporation at the time of the 14th Amendment, all that should have meant in reference to the Bill of Rights was that now that the freed slaves were citizens, that they enjoyed the same protection from the federal government as the whites, meaning they had the same Bill of Rights. It did not give the federal government the ability to take that Bill of Rights and say, we're going to apply substantive due process to all of this, and if it doesn't meet our liking, then we're going to strike your law down. Nobody believed that. It would have only meant that, hey, now blacks have protection from the federal government as well. Those 10 amendments. Is that accurate?
Correct reading would be that as full citizens of the United States, as established by the 14th Amendment, black folks would be entitled to claim the protections of the first 8 amendments of the Constitution, just as any white citizen, but those protections against the federal government, as you pointed out. Obviously, the history teaches us that the newly freed slaves needed some additional protections, and that was found in the Civil Rights Act, which the 14th Amendment constitutionalized, frankly, and the idea, which we've talked about, of equal protection of the laws, and the idea specifically in the Civil Rights Act that blacks need to have access to the courts, be able to testify just like a white man in a case, be able to enter into contracts, sell property, inherit. Those were the main goals of the Civil Rights Act.
Basically, Article 4 rights. Basically, everything under Article 4, which is the Privileges and Immunities Clause. I think that's the right one. I may be wrong on that.
Fair enough.
Basically, all those same rights outlaid in the Constitution. Now that applies. That's what it was supposed to mean. But so let me ask you this: under what legal authority, what constitutional authority does the court have to incorporate the Bill of Rights against the state?
I don't think they had any authority to do that. Now, to be fair, you can find some remarks from John Bingham and others that talk about applying the Bill of Rights to the states, that the 14th Amendment will do that. But you can find remarks in just about any legislative record for various propositions for what an individual believes a measure will do. Looking at the totality of the remarks, looking at the language, looking at contemporaneous interpretations, I think the greater weight of the evidence is no, Congress didn't intend to incorporate the Bill of Rights. They certainly didn't intend for the court to aggrandize its power to the extent it did, insofar as we've got to remember Dred Scott was just a decade earlier than the 14th Amendment, and the Republicans were none too happy with Justice Taney's understanding of federal powers in the territories, the Missouri Compromise, this, that, and the other. So they had no intention of expanding judicial power. The enforcement mechanism in the 14th Amendment itself says that Congress is the one that has the authority to enforce this article of the amendment, not the courts. I mean, obviously, when it's constitutional interpretation, courts have to take notice of the Constitution, whether it's in Article 1 or an amendment when they're interpreting. But no, the framers of the amendment certainly didn't intend to create this monster judiciary we have today.
Yeah. Well, and also the states that ratified it. I mean, it was not just the southern states that didn't want to ratify it. A lot of the northern states didn't want to ratify it. And I just have a hard time believing that any of the states at that time, because both North and South at that time were, despite the war, still believed in some level of states' rights, and were still, they did not want to create a consolidated government. So I think looking at the ratification, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find. You might find a New England state maybe that would have ratified it, understanding that it would have done that, but I don't think you'd have found any states that would have ratified it if they thought that's what it was going to do.
And you have explicit references in the record where Northern members of Congress, when explaining what the amendments would do, they assured the folks back home that, hey, look, as long as we don't have laws trampling upon the rights of the freedmen, like the black codes are doing in the South, it's business as usual up here. This is not going to change the way we govern ourselves at all. And if they believed that the Bill of Rights was incorporated, well, okay, that's not true. You're going to have to expand use of grand juries, petit juries in civil cases, a number of state criminal procedure would have to change. Their constitutions would have to be amended, etc. And that's not what was sold to the people of the North.
Right, right. And of course, at that time, most of all of them had a very small, in some cases, negligible black population. And they would keep it that way until probably the 20s. So it was kind of like, hey, that's going to be a Southern problem, not our problem. So they weren't going to have any negative repercussions from their perspective of
right. No, this was a measure to police the Southern states and their treatment of the freedmen. That's the purpose of the 14th Amendment. Right there. Again, really to constitutionalize the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is the purpose. It's not to undo any means of business in the northern states or to correct any folly of constitutional government in the northern states. It was directed at the southern states. And again, the relationship of the freedmen to the state governments of the South.
So what can we do? I mean, I guess Congress would have to fix this as far as the judicial overreach, because that's what it is. The whole thing is a court-created mess. Congress would have to fix that, and they actually have the authority to do that, don't they?
Well, there's a number of things Congress can do. It's not talked about too much, but Congress can strip jurisdiction from the court over certain disputes, except matters in their original jurisdiction. And most of the cases the court hears is in the appellate jurisdiction, which is subject to regulations by Congress. So that is a very big stick that Congress could use against the courts that there's no stomach to. I think the problem there is, I had an old professor, he used to describe it as the happy convention, that Congress is actually pretty thrilled that the court has taken so much controversy and workload off its plate, and they have no real stomach to see that changed. I mean, just like, frankly, with the abortion decision, I don't think you had some, again, strong, strict constructionist Republican members of Congress that cheered the Dobbs decision. But I think your Lindsey Grahams and your majority of them would have preferred just to leave that with the courts and say, yeah, abortion, I hear you. But the court said it's, we can't do anything. It's the courts. It's the courts. It's the courts. And I think that's their inclination.
I think we have to push them. We have to make it an issue and say, look, we want you to reel them in. They did this on their own. You've allowed them to do it on your own. Only you can roll it back. So, any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, my closing would just be to echo what you said. I think any change that we're going to have is going to come from grassroots efforts. It's not going to be a top-down thing. It's going to be people working to bring common sense first in their school boards, their county councils, their city councils, and have this, work up the chain till we can influence bodies above that in Congress and otherwise. But it's going to start locally. And it has to be something that filters up. We cannot expect for all, perhaps some good that we see in changes the Trump administration has brought with immigration, enforcing the law and things like that. There's only so much that you can do from the top down. It's going to take a groundswell.
Absolutely. And the website for the Independent Institute, it's a good site, guys. Good information on there. And do you have any upcoming events or anything else you want to talk about?
No, the only thing is I'm looking forward to going to Columbus, Georgia in October to do a 14th Amendment conference with the Abbeville Institute. Have Joe Wolverton's going to be there, Marshall DeRosa, Jeff Merriam from Patrick Henry College. It should be a number of others. Good discussion on the original intent of the 14th Amendment, the culture wars. So that will be fun. Okay.
And you had some other, we'll talk about your books again real quick if we'll just pop those up. Crossroads for Liberty. Now, this is an older book, but this is some of what we just covered, recovering the Anti-Federalist tradition. And then we have In All Fairness, and his chapter is, let's see, what is it? Has to do with, I cannot remember the title of the chapter. I know it starts on about page 105, but it covers how the court is so out of control and how it got that way. It talks about the 14th Amendment. And then this is an upcoming book, The Independent Guide to the Constitution. So, and you've written several other books. These are just a few that we're featuring. And hey, thanks again for coming on. I'd love to have you back. I'd like to make it down to Abbeville. I don't know if that'll happen or not. Joe Wolverton, I've had him on the show a few times. Great guy, and he's from Tennessee. But he does a really good job as well. Well, hey, thank you again, and hey, I appreciate you missing the first day of bow season to be with us. I appreciate that. So
there'll be a big buck for me somewhere.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks again, and we will see you in the future, I hope.
Thank you, Dave.
I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, so please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Thanks again to Jonathan and Mary for their financial support for the month of July, August, and September. We really appreciate it. Check out our audio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We, the people of West Tennessee, present Nullification, Past and Present, Citizens for State Sovereignty, Tuesday, September 16th from 6 to 8 p.m. That's Jackson First Assembly, 1027 West Forest Street in Jackson, Tennessee. Danny Blitz will be the speaker for that. She is with TNC Citizens for State Sovereignty. Wednesday, September 17th, Constitution Day, we have a meet and greet with gubernatorial candidate Monty Fritz from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Keystone Resort, 150 Clubhouse Drive, Loretto, Tennessee. RSVP by calling 931-446-7873. I will see you there. Sharam Hadian, Battle for America, Islamic Sabotage, and Our Response. The White County Republican Party will host this. This will be at Courthouse 1, East Beckman Way, Sparta, Tennessee, September 22nd at 6 p.m. The TFA in Cookeville will host TNCSS Speaker Danny Blitz once again to discuss nullification September 29th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Logan's Roadhouse, 1395 Interstate Drive, Cookeville, Tennessee. Our second guest tonight at 8. Okay, we do have one more announcement here, if I can read that one. And this is this coming Saturday, 20th at 8 a.m. This is, I'm sorry, okay, this is the Maha Institute, Soil Stewardship. And what is, let's see, that is this Dunlap, Tennessee from 8 to 4. And it doesn't cost anything, but you need to go online and register. And just, if you Google Maha Institute, it'll take you to that. I apologize, I'm not able to read that. Okay. Second guest tonight at 8:30 Central will be Ann McLean of the Virginia Council to discuss the Marxist movement behind the attack on Confederate and American monuments. You can find a link to that show right here on your YouTube channel and also on our website, teeninformer.com. Tomorrow night, 7 p.m., I will be appearing on the Mike Weatherford Show for a special presentation on Charlie Kirk assassination, including a vigil that will be coming up in Paris, Tennessee. You can find Mike's show on Facebook under the Mike Weatherford Show, as well as on YouTube under My Paris TV. Next week, we will have another great lineup of shows on Monday, September 22nd. Start the evening off with Tiffany Boyd. She will join us this time to discuss the dark side of the school choice movement. Yeah, there is a dark side. Is it a globalist scam? And we'll also dig into some shocking relationships and some unlikely organizations, or you would think that they would be unlikely. Second presentation, Will Bolton joins us to discuss his intention to run for representative in District 23 against incumbent Lee Lackey, Mark Cochran. You don't want to miss it, so mark your calendars and share it with your friends. Hope to see you then. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.